Greater Good Radio. Connect, learn, heal, and grow.
So this is a story that has to do both with LSD and with MDMA. So the story is there's a man who was in his 60s, and I got to know him because we were studying with Stan Groff. This is about 25 years ago. And what had happened when he was a young man, when he was like 19 or so, he had an LSD experience that was terrifying, that went wrong. And what happened during this LSD experience is that he was trying to feel connected, but he felt that he was an imperfect human being. And he got things twisted up in his mind. And what he ended up thinking is that the only way that he could show that he fully honored spirit and what he thought of as God would be to commit suicide, because he was a flawed human being. And so it's this sort of real punitive place he got into. And he said he was driving his car on the edge of the cliff, and he was thinking he would just drive his car off the edge. And he ended up not doing that. He did crash the car, but he crashed it into the mountain. But from that, he could never really trust himself. There was this part of him that had sort of been so punitive that it wanted him to end his existence. And over time, he had tried to work with this, and he had become a therapist. And so we met, and what he said was that it still burdened him, that there was still this deep level of distrust of his own inner psyche. And so we decided to do MDMA. And what happened under the MDMA was that he ended up revisiting this trauma, that the MDMA, through the reduction of fear, it helped him to look at this trauma in a different way. It also helped him to tell me actually a fuller story, because what he had done was even worse than what he had told me. He had decided he was in a car. He had thinking maybe he would run off the edge of the cliff. He didn't do that. But then he said what he did do is he decided he would kill himself by running into another car and have a head-on collision, and he would die. But that's also endangering somebody else. And so at the very last minute, he was doing that. And at the very last minute, he veered off and ran into the mountain rather than this other person. But this idea that he was even driven to kill somebody else as a way to try to get himself, that helped him to, once he could acknowledge the full depth of the horror of what he had done, and to realize that he needed to accept himself, not as, he didn't have to be perfect. He could be a flawed person. This was not the standard that he was using to judge himself, was way too hard. This was an LSD trip gone wrong in many ways. He didn't have support when he was doing it. And so this was 40 years after that LSD trip, that the MDMA trip helped him to look more deeply even at the mistake that he had made, and to accept that, and to feel really solid now that he would not need to do anything like that. He had learned in a way by accepting that he could now trust himself. And so that was just one of the most remarkable healing stories I'd ever seen. But it's a good illustration, because it is the healing potential of MDMA by somebody who carried this trauma for 40 years and was finally able to undo that and to live with himself and to move forward in a more healthy way.
If you resonate with Greater Good Radio, please join our community at www.greatergoodradio.com, where you can get access to exclusive content and offerings. Hope to see you soon.